in the cloud.
Thank you. Okay, welcome this is our long COVID chat. We have been talking about this internally as a team for, I don't even remember how long, and we'll get to memory being affected in a minute. But it's been a really long time. I'm Hassel, Aviles, she, her, hers pronouns, and I am the co-founder and executive director of Not 9 to 5. This is part of the Not 9 to 5 team. There are more people on our team, but these are the folks that I have been talking to about what it's been like since I got tested positive for COVID. And that for me personally was approximately 2 months ago. And it's just been a whirlwind ever since. I never expected it to have these long-lasting symptoms that I'm still experiencing. So we just wanted to get together and normalize this conversation. There's so many of us that are experiencing this. We've been sharing on our social media lately that, I'm referencing an article that speaks to 1 in 3 people having a lot of neurological and psychological long-lasting symptoms after getting COVID. And I didn't realize it was so many. But then obviously, as I started talking to more people around me, close to me on this team in particular, all of us were having our own different versions of the same story. So that's me. I'm going to pass it off to Alexis. Why don't you go first and introduce yourself? We'll go around and introduce ourselves.
Sure. So my name's Alexis, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Community Outreach with Not 9 to 5. And I am also a restaurant manager. I started experiencing, I got COVID about 3 months ago. So that's my timeline currently. Lisa, you want to introduce yourself?
Jacqueline's off mute. You can go.
Yeah, sure. I'm Jacqueline. I have worked in the hospitality industry as a server and manager, an event planner on and off for like 10 years. And I currently work as a social worker. And I had COVID in April. So that was about 2 months ago.
And I am Lisa Quigley. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an administrative assistant for Not 9 to 5. And I actually just recently got back into restaurant industry after taking, a few months break to focus on school and my own mental health. And I've actually had COVID twice, pretty much like exactly 90 days apart, even with all my shots. And the first time was tired, but honestly, like no symptoms, is pretty breezy. And then the second time, maybe now, I think it's about a month and a half, maybe 2 months ago, very similar timelines. And yeah, like really took me out. And with the fatigue and all the long lasting symptoms that I did not expect. But yeah.
Thanks, everyone. So yeah, I think this conversation for me means so much because I remember the first time I started reading about, I'd heard of long COVID, but I thought long COVID was just like a fog. I didn't really understand that there could be other symptoms as well. So I remember thinking, yeah, like it's really hard to focus. My memory's all messed up. I can't remember but that was already kind of happening before I got COVID too, just like pandemic kind of stuff. Time was confusing. What really started alarming me though was getting major flares up of my depression coming back. Major depression symptoms. And there's something weird about knowing so much about your own mental health challenges and mental illness and stuff. Because as it was happening, I knew exactly what was happening. right? Is like, I know what these symptoms are. I've know this feeling. And it was almost like I was spiraling a little bit. Like it was so terrifying that it was happening to me. And I knew what was happening to me and I couldn't stop it from happening to me. And it just, I don't know, kind of felt like I was drowning a little bit. And I remember, Alexis, you were one of the first people that I think I kind of talked to, because you were one of the only people I knew that had COVID. And, you kind of validated some of that stuff for me. And then Jacqueline, I remember you and I were at that team dinner and you brought it up, actually. I think you brought up the depression piece. And I swear I felt like so seen and heard for the first time in so long. Can you talk to me a little bit about that, Jacqueline? Like what your specific experiences of depression? Because you named it for me. I don't know that we were naming it, Alexis, when we were first talking. I think we were just saying like, yeah, our mental health is really affected. And I don't know why I didn't name it, because I obviously know what it is. But yeah, Jacqueline, do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
For sure. It's actually like really interesting because even after we've talked about it at that meeting or like at the dinner, I've been talking to a lot of my colleagues and people have had COVID and haven't, and everyone asks about like, oh, like, was it really like severe for you? Like how severe was it? But in any conversation, like they're asking about the physical symptoms, right? Like they're asking about, did you have difficulty breathing? Like, did you have fever? Like, what was like that for you? But for me, I had like cold-like symptoms, but it was really more the sadness, the depressive symptoms that kind of blew me over. So I remember like just like the fear of getting it because you're having these symptoms and like it is such a stigmatized thing. I work in healthcare. It's such a stigmatized thing in healthcare. No one obviously wants to get it here. And so like when I started having symptoms, the fear of it, the fear of like, ooh, could I have possibly passed it on to someone? So that I think has like a mental impact on you because no one wants to get anyone else sick. But then the isolation was the biggest piece for me. And I think it's probably not talked about a lot because we've gone from lockdown to not lockdown to lockdown. Like we've been through so many lockdowns where we were limiting who we interacted with, that there's been a piece of like loneliness and isolation kind of throughout the last 2 years. But in all of it, I did connect with like a few people, and to go from having those few connections that were kind of like my tether points, like keeping me grounded, to having not being able to see anybody. It is an intense experience to be in your own space with only your own company and in your own thoughts for 10 days when you're feeling low, which is in general when I know that I start like thinking some hard thoughts, thinking about like maybe things in my life that are making me sad or just not going the way I want to. And because I didn't have a lot of energy, I didn't have the ability to cope the way I normally do, right? So I couldn't like go and clean something or do some yoga or do like other things that are kind of my self-care activities. I couldn't even really go out for a walk because I had to isolate and I couldn't interact with people. So I remember like telling Hassel about just like being so incredibly sad and not really processing it because I'm thinking of only the physical symptoms of it. And then like making myself do something that I enjoy while still being very sad, but at least I was sad and doing something. And then that for me, it was puzzling. It was jigsaw puzzling. And at least for me, I wasn't just like in that kind of pit of sadness, but it was a really intense experience for sure. And not one that I think like anyone talked about. So I wasn't prepared to be in.
I totally agree. I feel like we have had so many articles and interviews and all the stuff around the physical symptoms, and really not a lot around the emotional all the emotional, symptoms, side effects, experiences, that's what I'm looking for. All the emotional experiences attached to COVID have far, far, far been more intense than the physical ones for me. Alexis, can you talk a little bit about, because you, I think, were the only person I know that had COVID and wasn't at home, and what that did with your mental health as well?
Yeah, so I have a unique situation where I live with my partner in a very close space, and both of us have jobs where we can't work on if we're sick. So I had to isolate from them in what we call like an isolation hotel. It was a very bizarre experience. They pick you up. I went there, brought you meals throughout the day, but I was in essentially like, like a kind of grimy, like half nice hotel for 5 days, waiting out the symptoms and kind of monitoring them. But talk about like isolated. I mean, my symptoms were more just pure exhaustion than anything else. So I wasn't in contact with anyone because I was just sleeping, and so I was just like sleeping and waking up. And then when I finally got some energy to be awake or start to reach out to people, I mean, I was just stuck in this hotel room. It didn't have a balcony. It didn't have a window I could open. So, it was a long time of being in this like very, very physically and mentally isolating area. And Jacqueline, that's when those thoughts start, the intrusive thoughts have no barrier. Like there's nothing going on to kind of stop them. I personally, for me, like the depression piece, it took me a little longer to realize how serious that had gotten. But for me, the more immediate and the first like few weeks after was the really intense anxiety that almost crosses over into like a paranoia level of it, where sometimes the anxiety was for no reason at all, but sometimes it was about like things that are going, like you said, Jacqueline, things going on in my life, and just feeling incredibly paranoid and having these ruminating thoughts. But yeah, I don't think that the physical space in which I was experiencing COVID helped with that at all. Yeah, it was very intense, but definitely like I think back to some of those thoughts and some of those feelings I had while I was in that hotel room, and how they continue to pop up.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I'm so glad that you're sharing that, Alexis, because I think everyone's experience is so different, but I think intrusive thoughts are something that aren't discussed often, but are quite often experienced by those that, struggle with depression and anxiety or other mental health challenges. And I have found, and I mean, so much research backs this up as well, like isolation is not great for anyone that is struggling with their mental health. And so much of the pandemic has been kind of like pushing us in that direction. I had a real hard time with the term social distancing. I really fucking hate that term. I think it's important to talk about physical distancing. Obviously, I understand why that term started to be used so often, but I think it's really irresponsible and dangerous to in any way encourage folks to, not stay socially connected. And not 9 to 5 even. I mean, so many of the years of work we've done together, we've been like this. We've been on Zoom, and that's so random and weird, but also I can't tell you how much it has helped me at the same time, because even when we've had to be physically distanced, we've been socially connected for years now, which is so incredible. As much as I get Zoom fatigue and, I get overwhelmed with tech sometimes, staying socially connected to people has been a lifeline. Lisa, can you talk to us a little bit about your COVID experience?
Yeah, definitely. Mine was a bit I don't know, different, not different, but I really struggled with the like societal kind of expectations of, exactly because we focus so much on the physical symptoms. And so I got really sick. And then, but then I technically like felt better, I guess. I was testing negative again. My isolation period was up. So I felt like, okay, well, now I should be better. And I was so hard on myself that I wasn't, that I was kind of forcing myself into situations that, I was not mentally or physically actually capable of really doing. But I thought like, well, I should be better. So like, what's wrong with me? And I'm supposed to not be isolating and I should be fine. So then, I would go to like a social thing and kind of force myself to be social and have this energy that was completely put on. And then it would like take me out for then like that many more days. Or feeling like, I was supposed to work. And it got to the point where I was just so physically exhausted and emotionally drained all the time that I remember like our first team meeting back. And within like half an hour of it, I actually like could not like keep, like I felt I was like prepared for it. I thought I was prepared for it. And then all of a sudden halfway through, I like could barely like listen or like hear words or like keep my eyes open. And I was like, what is wrong with me? And it got to a point, I had with so many weeks of this fatigue, that it got to a point, it's kind of like, am I taking advantage of this? Once again, I put it all on myself and felt like, oh, maybe I'm just like milking it. Like I should be working. I should be able to do these things. And I'm just like not. And then it was, working with a team like you guys, that being able to share that, with colleagues and workers and like being like, no, you had similar experiences. You actually could relate to the fatigue and could tell me like, no, this is not you. Like these are the long lasting symptoms. And then that obviously inspired me to do more research and then learning how, as you referenced, like 1 in 3, how many people are experiencing this, but don't even realize that like that's where it's related to, especially because it is so prolonged and sometimes almost like I've had quite a few friends, a bout of feeling better and then that delayed continuation of it. So sometimes it's hard to, put those 2 and 2 together. And so yeah, there's a lot of just being very hard on myself, feeling that like I just wasn't, performing or good enough. So that was, I think, my biggest mental struggle with COVID. Yeah.
I mean, I think you saw us all nodding there. Like, yep. And like, nope, like it's not your fault. It's not our fault. But yep, so relatable. I mean, okay, so I think it's important to acknowledge things like we do live in a capitalist system, right? And I think these things really impact us when we're forced into a state of rest that is longer than a day, or 2. It's like for some reason our society has made it acceptable to have like a weekend off, like 48 hours. And then you start to hit 72 hours and it's like the shoulding starts, we start shoulding on ourselves about all of the fucking things that we feel. And I don't think I've ever felt that quite as acutely as during the last few months. Like I've never really, I don't think, properly acknowledged how much these systems of oppression truly have me, brainwashed. Because I honestly had such the same thoughts, Lisa, like I'm supposed to be better by now. What the fuck's my problem? Like, what's wrong with me? And then like, why am I talking to myself like this?
Right.
I would never let anyone else talk to me.
Yeah. Like my greatest anxiety in that whole time solely came from resting and being like, I can't physically do anything else. But like, that was what made me so anxious, is exactly the shoulds and like actually just resting because it's what I needed to do. And I like could not handle it. Which then obviously just makes you need rest even further if you do try to push yourself in those times. So it's like, yeah, just no bueno. And it's so, because I had that experience and then being able to talk with you guys about it so openly has also now led to other, like, you know, friends and family that have now had it more recently. And they reach out and we're like, did you go through this? Like, I just feel awful. They're like, this can't be normal. And I'm so glad that they're asking like what it felt like for me, because I actually now can be like, it's not you. Like, this is so like across the board experienced. And being able to share the resources that we were able to find for each other, and, you know, these conversations, I kind of share those with others, and they're like, oh, like, you know, it really is like a light bulb goes off for a lot of people, to kind of stop the self like blame and negative self-talk around it.
Yeah, I've been trying to bring it up with everyone I can, even my barista. I was asking them about, they had telling me about how they had experienced COVID, and, you know, just using the opportunity to say, you know, just share, like, I've been having a lot of really rough, like, mental long-term, you know, residual kind of symptoms from it. And the validation you could see in their face where, you know, they're like, me, and, you know, me saying, I'm having issues with memory, I'm having issues with fatigue, I'm having issues with all these different things. It's so important to, I don't know. I've just been really open. I've been trying to be really open about talking about it, even though it's really hard. And it's hard. Obviously, some days a lot harder than others. When I'm feeling better, it's easier to talk about. But it does help, I think, to hear that it's not just you making it up in your head.
And Lisa, I think like you brought up such a poignant part, like thing that hit me, because, you know, like I had to isolate for like a certain amount of time and had to have like certain like 2 COVID tests that were negative before I could go back to work and things like that. And like my brain was so warped towards this idea of being like performance driven, which is the way our society works, that I was like, oh, like during this time, I can like work on some of these things that I need to do. And I can like read this book I really want to read and like do these things around the house. And then like the disappointment I felt in myself. And I think that is like really important to acknowledge, that it was like a personal disappointment that comes from just like the way we've been raised and the way that we're like taught that we have to like perform in order to be like to find substance and to be considered valid and things like that. And like my brain just couldn't comprehend this idea of like, I am off because I'm sick, so I need to not do these things, and I need to rest, and I need to take care of my body. And like that just like wouldn't process for me. And so like it was also like a strong reflection once I started realizing how I was feeling and the depressive symptoms that were coming up and the sadness, like, why am I feeling this way? And like, this isn't okay. And I was having to tell myself like every day, like it wasn't even just like I reminded myself once. I was like, no, you're sick. Like, take this time to rest. Like multiple times a day, I was like, stop trying to do something. Stop trying to feel bad about not being able to do it. You need to rest. Like, just rest. It's okay.
That is so real. I'm still having those daily conversations with myself, like literally still. Memory still really affected for me. Focus is really hard. I can do a lot of like that, what do they call it? It's like busy work, and then there's like deep work. Deep work has been very hard for me to access. So I've been finding what used to work for me doesn't work as much as it does. It doesn't work as well as it used to. All my kind of go-to, forms of treatment and things I've used in my recovery over the years. I mean, I've dealt with depression, anxiety, trauma, grief for over 2 decades now. And so I'm very, grateful for all the things in my toolkit or whatever, but a lot of them haven't really helped, which means now I'm having to find new ones and figure out new ways to cope. And Yeah, so it's wild. It's wild to think that we have to, like you said, Jacqueline, like decondition or like unlearn a lot of the stuff. And, you know, Lex, when you were talking earlier about intrusive thoughts, like, or negative, someone else mentioned negative self-talk, all of that to me is like mixed together, right? Because all these thoughts and messages keep coming in, and a lot of them are not like they're not helpful, they're harmful. So I have to really be careful about like asking myself like daily, like, is that's not helpful. No, that's a harmful no, like, and then actually having to like do that and like divide the thoughts. But it's when you're getting them, you know, in abundance. Um, I mean, that's a whole job in itself that's exhausting, let alone all the other jobs we have in our lives. Um, to do. And so I think this conversation is so, so important to put out there. And, you know, if anyone's listening and this is the first time you're kind of hearing about this, help spread the word and help share, you know, that this is common. Because so same as you, Alexis, like how you were saying, you're talking to as many people. I have anyone I know that's gotten COVID recently, I've reached out and been like, hey, just FYI, this happened to me and I had no idea this was possible. So just throwing it out there. And actually one friend came back to me recently and she said I was the only person that had brought this to her radar. And she was so grateful because during COVID, she ended up spending like 3 days crying in bed. And she said, had you not told me ahead of time your experience, she's like, I don't know what I would have done because I wouldn't have known that this can happen. And she would have probably like similar to what I did, but thankfully you know, I have access to a lot of information. But what happens is if you don't have access to a lot of information, you end up internalizing it. So she said, you know, I'm so glad that you told me this because I think had you not, I would have internalized it, which would have made it scarier and worse.
And I think that's like a really important thing too, right? Because there's a lot of fear of unknown related to COVID, which is scary in and of itself and can bring up negative emotions. But if you've ever had like a mental health, like you've had depressive episodes or things like that, once these feelings start coming back, like I know for me, I was just like, oh dear God, like please don't have this happen again. And then you're like hyper aware, or I was hyper aware of every little feeling I was having, and then trying to decide like, is this a normal depressive episode? Is this related to COVID? Like, where is this going? And having to kind of bring it back down into like a digestible piece of like taking it moment by moment and day by day and bringing like things into my life that will bring me even the smallest amount of joy and just keep an eye on it. But like you, Hassel, you were talking about spiraling, like so easy to spiral. And I think when people are having negative emotions or negative thoughts, like also super common, like just super common. You're already tired, you're already worn down. Like that is prime time for us to like start thinking about these things and let ruminating thoughts happen. But that was a piece for me too, is just like the fear of these feelings coming up and that it could lead to another depressive episode.
Yeah, that reminds me so much, as I said, like the hyper awareness. And then you're like, it reminds me of when I suffered from quite severe insomnia. And then I like approaching bed, I was so scared about not being able to fall asleep that then I couldn't fall asleep kind of thing. And that like, yeah, I feel like it's kind of that similar thought process that helps. But Hassel, something that you had said that really resonated when you said, you know, you are so fortunate you have access to these resources. And it makes me think so much too, you know, we're so lucky we work in a mental health space. We do have access to these resources. We have access to each other and, you know, do often openly talk about these conversations. And it's still so hard for us, you know, as people that have that. And so it makes me grateful, but then also realize like why I think so much more inclined to just like try to open up that space and talk about it as much as possible, because so many people don't. And if we're struggling, then you know how many people that don't have access to that and that, yeah, mental health space and conversations and like trusted friends, you know. makes it so much harder.
Yeah, because it's not common in workplaces, like a lot of workplaces, especially, it's not a common thing that you can talk about, and everyone's like, glad you're better. Oh, here's all the things you missed, and like, here's all the to-do, here's the backed up to-do list that you missed while you were gone. Yeah, so I think like giving friends heads up is so important. Checking in on friends after they've had COVID and seeing how they're doing is super important. But yeah, it's so funny. I just lost my train of thought, which is one of those common COVID-y things that I've been noticing more and more of. But with that like hyper awareness, there's certain things that the symptoms that have been really scary to me and have scared me to the point where I then get additional anxiety on top of the anxiety I'm already feeling. So there was a situation where I had, like I'm forgetting times, like appointments, dates, things that I should know. I knew I had an appointment 20 minutes ago, and then all of a sudden I'm walking out the door to go get groceries because I just forgot. Like I knew 20 minutes ago that I had something coming up, and then all of a sudden it's gone. Not being, yeah, it's, and those are the kind of things that when that happens, it's so different than your usual self. Like we can all be forgetful, and like you said, especially over the pandemic, like time is weird, timelines are weird. But when you're starting to feel symptoms like that, and it feels so not like yourself, it does make you very scared. And then yeah, it sure doesn't help with the anxiety of it all. And then with anxiety, and then it's just all this whole terrible cycle.
I know, that is the word for it. It is kind of becoming a cycle. You're right, Alexis. It's cyclical. You can kind of almost find the patterns in it sometimes, which can be comforting and terrifying at the same time. Like I was saying earlier, the knowing is sometimes such a blessing and a curse. I'm so grateful, like you said, Lisa, to have all the access and all this stuff. And also, it's like having anxiety about anxiety. When you know what a panic attack feels like and you feel that coming on, it is such a terrifying feeling. And same with depressive episodes, like you were saying, Jacqueline, when you've had a really intense crisis or depressive episode and you feel that coming on again, like that's what was happening to me. I was like, I know what this is. And there was no comfort in that knowing, in that experience. Like in other experiences, it has caused me comfort, the knowing, but in that particular experience, oh man, I was so scared. I was so scared to be going back there. Unfortunately, there were suicidal thoughts, obviously no plan, but I was so scared to have those thoughts. And like we were talking about, like, ruminating or negative self-talk mixed with thoughts, it's just a scary place to be. So obviously we've mentioned how much talking has helped, and we've all talked to each other, and we have other people in our lives that we talk to, and this conversation has helped me so much. I'm curious if we can go around, if you have anything. You don't have to if you can't think of anything, but I'm curious if we could possibly talk about anything that has been helping, or new coping, stuff that you've come across, new coping skills. Or I know for me, I'll start. I think having to accept, like having more acceptance and compassion has been really hard, obviously. It's always hard, I think, when you've been so conditioned one way. I have a lot of unlearning to do still. And so accepting and having compassion for the fact that I'm trying new things without any expectation has been really helping. Because I think in the past, sometimes when I try new things, I have so much expectation that, like, I hope this works, I hope that this new therapist or this new, type of therapy or this new exercise or this new whatever it is, is medication or meditation or whatever it is that you do, I used to put a lot of expectations, but then I always found that they led me to disappointment. So now I'm starting to try new things, and not because I'm expecting them to work, but just like almost like I try to think of it, and I'm so grateful to hospitality for this. I think of it like a tasting, right? Like if you have a flight of wines or a flight of whatever sodas or a flight of cheese or whatever it is, you're going through and you're trying things, but you're not like expecting to love them all, right? You're just like, oh, I wonder what this one is like. And so I've been kind of like trying to think about it that way, is like, I'm going to try these 5 new things and I'm just going to get curious about it. I'm just going to like see what happens. So hard to do because you have to really kind of retrain your brain. But it has really been helping. It also is keeping me busy. So that's helpful too, because I find rest is amazing, but sometimes if you're so, conditioned one way, that rest can also sometimes feel hard to do or inaccessible. So I feel like as I'm working less and resting to try to heal, I think reading new books and learning new things has kept my mind busy as well, while also helping. So anyways, that was my long-winded answer, but is there anyone else that has anything that they want to share that's been helping or anything?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, Alexis, beat you to it. I guess 2 things, which have been I'd say both have been very long processes of learning. They're not like immediate, like fix all kind of things. But I'd say the one thing for me is, as you said, Hassel, kind of similarly, like holding compassion for yourself, just trying to be so much kinder to myself, in that even if like there is the negative self-talk, I find I'm still like almost kind to myself about having those thoughts, if that makes sense. And being like, no, that is also still okay and normal, and like you're human and you will have those. So that's been really great. And yeah, being kinder to myself, also just constantly reminding myself like it's okay to not be okay, and just like acceptance of that alone, in like any type of situation, like that's okay too, because it's wherever you are. And then the other thing that's been really helping me, especially when I do get kind of in that, brain rabbit hole, like spiraling, which is something I've learned a lot through school. And when I feel myself, getting into those ruminating thoughts, I kind of try to take a pause and just, instead of, even if they are continuing, I try to get more curious. Like I approach it instead of like, why am I having these thoughts? You shouldn't be, but then they won't stop. I'm still having them, but I approach them with more of like a curiosity. And I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, these thoughts are here and they're definitely not going away. I wonder why, and I kind of try to reframe it, even if it's the same thing. And just really sitting with it and being like, it just is, it's not a positive or a negative. It's not a high or a low. It just is what it is. And just trying to see it as almost like that, like matter of fact curiosity thing. I'm not sure if that's like fully maybe like removing myself and separating myself, but I feel like it just, because then I know they're there. It's not like they're going away, but then, hopefully I can address them when it is coming, when I feel in like a more grounded, supportive place. And then I'll like revisit them later. So yeah.
That's so helpful. Did anyone else want to? Yeah, Jacqueline, go ahead.
Yeah, I've had a couple of things. It's interesting because like, I don't know if like kindness is a jump for me. Like self-kindness is like a little farther away from where I'm able to reach. So I was doing like baby steps of just trying to like limit judgment is where I was coming from. And I think that like, we're all different people and we have different abilities of like interacting with ourselves. So like just trying not to be so harsh on to myself, like where I'm coming from if I'm having like negative thoughts or things like that. And I think that was really it's a process, but it's been helpful for me because it's brought in a lot more reflection, which I have welcomed, and using more of an exploratory kind of like what you were talking about, Lisa, like being curious and exploring and being like, okay, so like what is coming up for me? What are some things that like are more consistent thoughts that I'm having? And what are things that like maybe aren't bringing me joy within my life, that can then highlight the things that do, and then what can I bring more into my life that really makes it feel worthwhile. So one of the things, like I am a gold star person. I love doing like tasks, checking them off my list, getting a gold star for them. So it's been really hard, especially with COVID and being tired and having mood changes and things like that. So instead of like trying to tackle everything on my list, I like really started to focus on like little things that bring me joy. And whether that was like going out for a walk, and I went out for a walk like in the middle of the night because I needed to exercise and I needed to be outside of my space and I didn't want to be around other people. So being creative like that, or like sitting in an outdoor space if you have one, or even just like sitting near an open window and like feeling a breeze. I know like I had friends ask me if I wanted them to bring me anything, and I had like groceries and all of these things. And so I felt kind of ridiculous saying it, but I 100% was like, can you bring me some dry eucalyptus? Because I really want to hang it in my shower. Or like, what I really want right now is a latte that I'm not making myself. Or like, I need to have some fresh flowers. And it was like actually having to talk to myself about like that being okay, right? Like you don't need like the essential things, or like these are actually essential things to you. So those were like big things that I've actually continued to bring into my life and bring more recognition to, and trying to kind of incorporate them. And then, yeah, just like, again, like a small joy. So if I didn't have the energy to read like a really in-depth book, like focus on like a really fluffy book if I'm able to do that, or listen to an audiobook or a podcast, or like just some music that I like. And recognizing that all of them kind of can provide comfort or can provide something that's beneficial to me. And it doesn't all have to be like top level, like working on articles or getting like work done for my job or something like that. Like everything has a nourishing quality if in the end it makes you feel even the littlest better.
Yeah, I have a little bit to add. I mean, I'm someone who, like, you know, the things that make me feel really great are like going for runs and going outside and enjoying the sunshine, especially now that the weather's gotten a little bit nicer over here. But that's not doable right now for me. Like, I don't have the energy to go for a run. The change in weather didn't change my mood like it normally does year to year this time, which was a big red flag to me. So just understanding like those things will still be there for me eventually, but like I just can't really access them right now. Something that has been like a really intense symptom for me has been extreme fatigue, and I've had to sleep a lot. And you know, even bringing that up with, you know, doctors or therapists, you know, the answer has been, well, that's a coping mechanism. And is it the best coping? You know, like maybe you're coping with a lot of the really other intense feelings you're having. Maybe, you know, sleeping is that. And maybe it is. And, you know, it's not the most unhealthy coping mechanism right now. And if I need to sleep more than I normally do, that's what has to happen right now. And so just being, again, like I'm the kind of person who on my day off, I want to get a ton of stuff done. I overbook all the time. You know, like, oh, I work at 3 p.m. Let's fit 6 things in the morning before I go. And just trying to not book things on my days off, saying no to plans. I had to say no to plans with Lisa in hotel recently that I really wanted to go to, but I just needed the time to rest. And so, you know, is it a long-term solution to sleep? You know, this many hours in a day, probably not, but I think just like listening to my body, and if that's what it needs right now, even though it makes me feel uncomfortable, or you have those negative feelings like I'm lazy, or just knowing like, you know, this is what I need right now, and that's okay. And all those other things that make me happy will be there when I'm starting to feel or so. And little baby steps, you know, like started biking to work again, you know, tried to like, you know, walk outside, like, no, you know, not the big exercise stuff or things that normally make me really happy, but it's okay to do. Baby steps are so hard. It makes you feel like, I don't know, again, being super hard on myself, like I feel like I'm incompetent and I'm not able to do the stuff I know I need to take care of myself. But if you're not in that place, you're not in that place. So just like a little bit of acceptance, I guess.
Oh man, yes, that is so helpful to hear, you know, because I think for me, baby steps has always been, for like personally, I'm just speaking for myself, baby steps has always been literally the only way out for me. Um, One foot in front of the other, literally. Like, can I do one more step? Can I do one more? Can I do another one? You know, like it's true, Alexis. It seems so ridiculous. You know, when you admit it out loud, you're like, really? I had to like take it in like that small incremental steps. Having said that, though, the one thing that I realized is that I don't usually put the same pressure on myself when it's physical health related, right? And then that's the conversation I've had to have a lot with myself, which seems bizarre because I felt like I'd kind of gotten past this at this stage with my mental health, in that, like, of course it, you know, is an injury. And I've always kind of understood that. But I think we think of physical injuries different than emotional injuries. And, you know, recovery from a physical accident, car accident, or, you know, if you have surgery or what have you, you know, it's like so well understood that you need time to heal. And that, of course, when you start walking again, or when you start using that broken or, you know, harmed part of your body, that it's going to take longer. But when it comes to our mental health, it's like, I can't believe we're still dealing with this, you know? And I don't mean us, I mean, even just like in society, like, it's so mind blowing to me, even still to this day, as someone who lives with mental illness, like when you're having a flare up of something, you know, no one brings you flowers. No one calls you up and sends you get well soon cards. Like, and again, I'm not saying this I'm not putting this out there in society to like guilt anyone or make anyone feel bad. It's just so shocking to me how different we treat them, you know, and even ourselves, but in society too, it gets like, it gets repeated in a louder, stronger way. You know, like you said, Alexis, you came back to work and everyone's just like, yep, right back to it. And it's unfortunate, I think, sometimes that that is still the case. But I also think that just makes it so that we have to have these conversations more, not just to remind each other, but ourselves, you know, that, like it was said earlier, it's okay to not be okay. And that, of course, everything's going to take longer. And of course, baby steps are going to be required. And yeah, so that was really, you know, oh, sorry, go ahead, Alexis.
I have a very unique experience in that I sustained a physical injury right after I had COVID, where I dislocated my elbow. And the way it's just, when you're talking about it, it's so funny because I had, you know, it was like I had COVID, dislocated my elbow, probably also not great for, you know, it kind of felt like everything was kind of like falling down all at once. But, you know, the way I was treated in terms of my injury at work, and, oh, careful, like you don't want to do too much too fast, like oh, like, and people would say like, what's the prognosis? And they say, it sounds like it's going to be about 10 weeks till I can get back to a full thing. And everyone totally understands it takes time for things like this to heal. But you never hear that about, and even COVID, it is still a physical illness, but it's still like, it's like, oh, your isolation's done. Okay, let's go. Like there's not the same like care, and it just feels so different. And I didn't really think about the two healings side by side, and how my elbow got better a heck of a lot quicker than my long COVID symptoms did. So still not all the way there. It's pretty good, but yeah, it's just an interesting side by side.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting. Good to reflect on, and really good to hear you say that. It's so validating. So any final thoughts before we close this up for anyone listening? No? Everyone got to say everything they wanted to say, share everything they wanted to share? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that is it from us at Not 9 to 5. I really appreciate all of you that are here, and anyone that listens to this. Just know that you are not alone. And this is 4 experiences. There's many millions more. So just reach out to those around you, reach out to us, and just know you're not alone. I think we can end this recording now.